This strange little owl lady is Juniper, also known fondly as the Owlchemist. She is my most well-known creation, she is my comfort character, and possibly the coolest thing I've ever made. This video is going to be a little bit different from some of the other stuff just because Juniper is so precious and personal to me. I'm resisting the urge to give you guys a 20-minute info dump on this character, but for now, hi, hello, my name is Miss Twisted, you can call me Charlotte. I do cosplay and makeup and other weird and whimsical stuff, and this video has been requested for so freaking long by so many people who have been constantly asking me how the ears move, so we're gonna go through it all today. And because I don't give a flying about cringe culture, I'm going to sprinkle in all the lore and backstory and history that I can possibly squeeze into this video just because I can. So because like Juniper as a costume already exists, but it is kind of in a state of disrepair, it means for this video I'm going to be doing a combination of upgrades, repairs, and some things I'm remaking from scratch. I'm going to remake some pants, go through all the little belty elements around my waist. We're going to figure out a shirt, make a cool pair of arm wings. Side note, this is what my arm wings do look like at the moment. They did not survive moving house. I'll show you how I made these cute little fuzzy cuffs, go through some extra little props and accessories, and then I promise we're going to go into proper detail about how I make these moving harpy headpieces. But for now, we're going to start at the bottom and work our way up, which means we are starting with some pants and shoes. Okay, I kind of lied about the shoes because I already have these, which I bought a few years ago and have been using for Juniper for quite a while now. Just because, like, I found these in an op shop, they are pure leather on the top, which means that they've been incredibly durable. They're exactly the right color. They've already got like a little bit of wear on them, which kind of just makes them look honestly perfect for her character. So I'm just gonna chuck those straight to the side. Let's look at the pants. Now these are the existing pants that I've made previously for her, and I really like the little pantaloon style thing that I had going on where it's kind of baggy around the top and then comes in at the shin. I don't know the historical term for that sort of shape, but I'm gonna stick with making the exact same shape again. You can kind of see a lot of my seams have like already started fraying because I never finished these seams properly. So I have a good enough reason to remake these. And turns out I still have some of this beautiful linen, which I think is the same ones I used to start with. I am gonna try and dye this into a slightly deeper brown. I still like that sort of beige sandy color, but I just want a little bit more of like a warm caramel tone to it. And I can't believe I forgot this the first time. I am making sure that I remember to sew pockets into those pants, because for the amount of times I make my own clothes, I never remember to do pockets, and it's so practical. Anyway, I'm a snob for good fabric where it counts, and because I want to be able to wear this to conventions and maybe if Australia ever gets Ren fairs, I'm so jealous of everyone overseas who gets Ren fairs, will need to be able to withstand the heat, basically. So I need breathable fabrics like linens and cottons for all my base layers. Alright, so I guess let's get into it.
So if you've been watching my work for a while now, you probably already know I don't use patterns, I don't like them, I don't like maths, I don't like measurements, I'm just vibing. So I'm literally just gonna trace the old pair and cut it out of this linen in roughly the shape that I know I need. And honestly, tracing over a pair of pants that I previously bought was exactly how I made the first pair too. Okay, and this is what my pant leg looks like. So I'm gonna cut out 2 of these, 1 for each leg, and you can kind of already see when it's folded up what kind of shape it's gonna be. And we've got a decent amount of offcuts in the middle here, perfect for making a bunch of little pocket pieces. I did kind of use a pattern for the pockets. I just googled pocket sewing pattern and tracing and cutting out 4 shapes of roughly what I saw in the images. So now I've got 4 little beans. Okay, so my goal in remaking these is to make sure this time they're finished properly so they are more durable. So I'm going to sew a straight stitch down these side seams, leaving a bit of room for the pocket, and up the inseam. Since I don't have an overlocker, I'm going to go back over this with a zigzag stitch just on the outer edge to try and catch some of those frayed bits already. We're going to do exactly the same to my little pocket pieces. Basically sewing 2 of these together all the way around apart from that little straight edge, which is where your hand's going to go. Now huge props for everyone on my previous video that told me that I am indeed doing French seams when I do this, but I've turned that back inside out and sewing a straight stitch down so that all of those raw edges are completely encased. And I'm going to do exactly the same thing to both of my leg tube pieces before I sew them together, to hopefully prevent any stray bits sticking out past the seam I'm about to sew. Finally, I've pressed this seam flat with my iron, and we're just going to run a straight stitch down one side to make sure it stays nice and flat. Not my neatest sewing, but not bad either. Now I've got to sew in the pockets near near the top of the hips where I left the stitches open here. Sewing these in kind of reminded me of sleeves, how like it takes you a moment in your brain to try and work out which way to sew them in so that like when you turn everything inside out in the right way, everything is sitting where it's supposed to. And I got it wrong a couple of times and had to unstitch too.
My last step with the pants is sewing the two leg pieces together on the crotch seam, which basically goes all the way from the front all the way to the back, and then you have pants basically. And I really was struggling to get my head around it, but I think I have my right sides on the inside. So my leggy tubes, currently this outside bit is, well, it's the wrong side. So God, what am I trying to say here? I hate this. This is why I don't use patterns on measurements, because I can't get my freaking head around things. I just do things until they work. All right, long story short, the wrong side is currently on the outside. The wrong sides are being pinned together. I'm going to sew along there for my first stitch, turn the thing inside out, sew along the second stitch. And if I've done this right, that will give me a nice seam in the correct spot. Just in case I haven't yet said it during this video, quick reminder that I have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to sewing. I just do things. Basically, for the bottom of the pants where the hem would be, I want to create some little cuffs to sit around my shins. And I have this elastic here. The only problem is that this stuff was like $23 a meter. Why is elastic so expensive? Who decided that elastic was going to be the thing that just cost an arm and a leg? Anyway, I got half a meter of this, which was enough for 2 of these pieces, which together only just fits comfortably around like the meaty part of my shin. So I'm going to literally sew like this and just zigzag stitch down here to try and preserve as much of the like length of this as possible.
On the bottom of the pants leg here, I'm just slapping on a little rolled hem to enclose that edge before I sew it directly onto the elastic. To sew this on, I'm using a sort of like triple zigzag stitch that I was recommended. Apparently it's really good for stretching, and it seems to work quite well with the stretch fabric, so I think they were onto something. For some elastic at the top of the pants, I'm just enclosing some elastic in this sort of beige cotton jersey. The bottom of this jersey does have a raw edge, but that will be enclosed within the pants, and because this is a jersey, I've never had this fraying at all, so I'm not that worried about it affecting the durability.
Okay, so pants are done. You can't quite see them in the frame, I think. Maybe if I stand on tippy toes. Oh, there you go. All right, cool. So yeah, the shape is awesome. I think it's a little bit more round than the last pair I've made, and I'm kind of into that. I think it's a really nice shape. Having pockets is great, you guys. I can't believe it took me this long to start sewing pockets into things. God damn, this is fantastic. Now the waistband is ugly as heck because I've left a lot of the stitching very exposed, but all of the edges are fully encased. So it's probably the most finished garment I've ever made, because I'm usually really lazy when it comes to sewing, or less lazy and more impatient because I just never finish off my edges properly. Anyway, the fit is nice, like nothing's sitting too tight, and this is over currently 2 pairs of thermal leggings I'm wearing right now, just because I live in Australia, it's winter here, and all of our houses are made of paper. So it does mean if I'm wearing juniper to some sort of event in winter, I can wear layers underneath and it still fits really nicely. Anyway, this is about ready to go in the dye, and I was looking at my dye colors, and one of them's a little bit more orange than I would like. So I actually think I'm gonna try and do a coffee stain, which is exactly what it sounds. I'm just gonna dump these in a big ass pot with some instant coffee, and I'm just gonna leave it overnight because essentially it should give it like a really nice caramel tone. There's definitely a dad joke here about this being like the portion size of my morning coffee, but actually this smells freaking delicious, not gonna lie.
I read somewhere that if you have your clothing completely soaked through before you put it in the dye bath, it can help the color soak in a bit more evenly. I ended up taking these out and rinsing them after only an hour or 2. I got caught by that old chestnut where they always look way darker while they're in water.
Alright, super quick segue for some, I don't know, mistwisted deep lore, I guess. I made Juniper back in 2020, and I think one of the reasons why she's become so important to me is it was the first thing I created that really gained a lot of traction online. And one thing led to another from there, and now I'm doing this as a job. I literally wouldn't be here making videos, doing what I love for a living without her. Is that not wild? So the idea for this owl character came about because, well, I really like owls, and I got that from my nana. My nana's whole house is covered in little owl figurines. It is the best. And I've always really liked fantasy and fantasy creatures, so I wanted to kind of create like an owl harpy character. Partly also because I'd seen a lot of dragons and mermaids and fairies, but not really any harpies. And I liked the idea of subverting the mythology of like harpies being these savage creatures. So, in the middle of lockdown, I bought a bunch of feathers and a spiky wig and then sat around waiting for it to arrive because postage takes a billion years to Australia even when it's not during lockdown. Put a pin in that, we're gonna come back to this story in a bit. Good morning, everyone. I have no power this morning. This was a planned power outage. Did I plan for it? No, I did not. They told me about it a few weeks ago, so I have no excuse. Like, I put it in my diary. I just forgot about it until late last night. So I rushed to like, oh, there it goes. Cool. That was my ring light, which means that my laptop battery has now officially emptied. I do have a little power bank here, so I got that for emergencies if I really need it, but I don't think I'm really going to get much work done today because most everything that I have involves the sewing machine because I'm not going to hand sew that. My pants are still drying. It's not likely that they're going to dry today because it's like foggy and rainy outside, and inside the heating is not working, hence why I'm wearing a bazillion layers and can barely move my arms. Hey, what's up? The power's back. I think they were supposed to be out from like early morning until like 3:30 p.m. and it's like 1 p.m. and they turned it back on. So that's good for me. In the meantime, I went out like for a walk and bought some more thread and things like that. And I went to a bunch of like local op shops and I found this shirt, and this is like a 50% linen, 50% viscose. It's pretty soft and it's gonna be breathable as hell. So this is my new Juniper shirt because the only thing I need for Juniper is it needs to be like a collared shirt that buttons up at the front that's like at least covers the top of my arms. The only thing that I need to change about this is there's like a bunch of like little white beads decorating some of this embroidery work. I'm gonna cut those off because they're gonna drive me absolutely crazy. So all of these little white dots here are the seed beads from the shirt that I just cut off because I was being really careful and making sure that I kept all of the little seed beads on the shirt, so it'd be nice and easy to gently shake them into the bin once I'd finished cutting them all off. I forgot that they were on there, lifted up the shirt to take a good look at it and make sure I hadn't missed any, and flung all of the seed beads across my carpet. So this is gonna be a fun time for my vacuum cleaner.
For a tiny bit of decoration on the cuffs and collar of the shirt, I'm just using some decorative stitches with like this scalloped edge looking thing and this crisscross stitch.
Okay, so the pants are still drying. The shirt has been sufficiently decorated. While I'm waiting on those elements, I'm gonna work on some belty bits. So these are just a bunch of different things that go around the middle of the waist, and this is what I was using in the past, and I'm still really fond of this. Also, you can tell I made this before I realized how to use grommets or eyelets because I made these sort of like makeshift loopy things out of bias binding instead for like a corset lacing, which I mean, to be honest, was pretty ingenious considering my skill level at the time was like 0. I'm suddenly remembering a bunch of little things about this that I wasn't happy with, like the fact that I've used horsehair braid in some places on the back here as a sort of like boning to try and hold some structure. Didn't work very well. It does make the inside feel horrible and itchy even through like a shirt or something. And the fact that I use the upholstery fabric, I remember that really did not help in terms of breathability. We are ditching that part entirely. Luckily, I do still have a fair bit of that trim left, enough for the waist easily. And I have this stuff, which I think is a muslin. Anyway, this is almost exactly the same color as the upholstery fabric. The only difference is this is thin as heck in comparison, so I'm going to need to put some sort of backing or lining on this to stiffen it up. Okay, past me is a genius because I actually had this stuff which I remember getting. It's just like a little sample-ish piece, but it'll actually be enough for the belt. I think it's like an imitation couture, so it's like a tightly woven cotton canvasy stuff. Anyway, it's a really stiff, really tight cotton fabric, so it's going to be perfect for backing a piece of this stuff to make a nice sturdy little belt thing.
With 2 big rectangles of this fabric, I'm doing a good old-fashioned bag lining, so sewing the 2 sides together, turning the whole thing inside out. Next, I'm going to sew in some darts, basically just like some little curved lines here, which is going to help the whole piece sort of curve around my waist a little bit. I want to add some boning to this belt piece, but I want to use these black zip ties, but the problem is the black shows through the sort of very light, thin muslin. So my solution to this was basically gluing it inside some white bias binding. A more efficient solution would have been getting some sort of boning that was white rather than black, but this is what I had on hand. Now, I'm not sure who originally came up with the concept of using zip ties as boning, but I found it through Sarah Spaceman, so I'm going to link that tutorial down below if you want to know basically how to do this in a bit more detail. This separate little end piece, I'm basically doing 2 channels of boning right next to each other with a little tiny gap in between, and that gap is where I'm going to put in some grommets.
All right, now I get to use one of my favorite new toys, which is this bad boy. And it's literally a grommet press, I think is the technical term. It also like hole punches and stuff like that. Okay. So I've got a nice little row of holes there. In hindsight, I probably should have like drew those out first and spaced them out to only have 6 holes rather than 8. A little bit overkill, but it's fine. It'll get the job done. So I'm just gonna like line up my 2 little pieces, just roughly mark where the holes need to be on the other side. Man, I really did do too many holes here. This is fine. We can deal. Round 2. All right, I have this, which I think is a straight pick, but it's like the same thing as an awl. It's a metal stick, you guys. I think you know how it works. And I'm just gonna like poke it into these holes and kind of widen them a teensy bit. I've got my little grommet piece. I'm gonna push that through here. I've got my little washer here. I'm gonna put that over that cylinder. Listen to me talking like I know things.
Oh, and quick note from voiceover Charlotte here that I've changed over the attachments on this press to the grommet press because there's like hole punches and grommet press. This thing is so cool, you guys.
And now let's basically like press the metal down around here so we have a nicely installed little grommet. Now I'm gonna do that another 10 or 15 times.
With all of the grommets and boning in place, I'm gonna sew these last pieces to the side to finish this off. It would have been easier to sew in my trim before I put in all the boning, because now I have to be extra careful and make sure that my needle doesn't go over any of those boning pieces. But I really didn't want to sew it on beforehand because I didn't want to have to do like a bunch of stitches running up and down, like interrupting the trim. This way the stitching is only really going to show on the edges of that trim. The back of this belt piece is just getting some sturdy white ribbon to lace up with, and I'm definitely keeping the little trinket sections from the last belt as well, so I'm just reattaching some of these. These are all just op shop pieces of like costume jewelry. Actually, I think this second one was from like a clearance section at Spotlight that I just couldn't help myself. The gold leaves just really seem to match with Juniper's vibe.
Okay, so we've got base layers pretty much done. The pants are sitting lovely. The color is beautiful. I have like an undyed piece of the fabric next to me. You can see the color difference is pretty subtle. I did take these out quite early because I was worried they were going to go too dark, and you can't come back from too dark quite as easily as you can just keep dying to go darker. But I do wish I'd left it in a little tiny bit darker on the pants. I'm tempted to do another coffee bath for these just to get a bit more color into them, but I'll worry about that part later. In any case, really happy with it. It's sitting nicely. The belt is sitting wonderfully, so are all my little jewelry bits that I've got sitting on there. And I really like how the collar turned out. I think it's really cute with the extra detail. Very subtle. The sleeves look really cute too. Okay, for Juniper, I do like to wear a lot of different bits and pieces around my belt and my waist, that sort of thing. One of those is this gorgeous little belt. This is from Foxes and Ravens, a absolutely fantastic leather worker. So I do kind of like the concept of mixing and matching my accessories for Juniper a little bit, like on certain days, depending on weather or what kind of look I'm going for. That's generally speaking how the belt goes. Like you can see I've lifted these things over. It does cover some of those jewel details, but then you've also got these awesome D-rings so you can like attach things to them. Hang on a sec. Here we go. So example, potion bottle in a little leathery case. Oh, I just realized I've done this wrong. There's like a leathery strap here for it that I think is supposed to go around the D-ring. You get the idea though, right? All right, some more examples of like just layering up stuff. I found this in an op shop. Honestly, most of the little bits and pieces that I have are from op shops at some point. I love this little bag, basket type thing. Oh, there's a receipt in here. I have no idea what this is for or when I put that in there. But anyway, so I've got this. I've got a little notebook hanging off here. This cute little potion holster was actually a gift from one of my patrons. So shout out to Yuri for that one. And then over here, it's just like a little pair of embroidery scissors, just because I thought it kind of matched the vibe. You know, I feel like an alchemist would have a little pair of scissors somewhere on her person for cutting herbs and stuff that she finds out and about. I don't know. So let's say I want to go full maximalist mode. Yes. Now I've got the 2 different potions. I've got a bag down here. I got a second bag here. I got some pockets going on. I've got my little potions, my notebook. I've got my scissors. I got extra little loops at the back that have got nothing hanging off them yet. There's room for more potions there. So for Juniper's glasses as well, I have this pair of frames here. Now this is like a cheap costume pair of frames. I found these by just Googling round gold Santa Claus glasses. And I think I found these on eBay originally for like $4. And I just popped the lenses out, and that was the base of them. Now I've had this glasses chain on them for quite a while, but I've recently added a couple of extra bits just because, again, if we're going maximalist, we are going all out. Now I don't think I'm gonna add any more around the eyes and the glasses because I think it's gonna start to be a sensory nightmare if I try to. Having said that, I think that like the extra necklaces and bits and pieces over here help balance out how much is going on around the waist. Segue number 2. I have no idea how to make these smooth transitions in the video, so you're just getting obnoxious interjections during the crafting. So when my wig and feathers arrived, I just started experimenting with them. I used little strips of cardboard for the ears, and before you all rush to actually me, I know they're called plumicorns in real owls. I just call them ears because it's easier, okay? And when I glued them into the base and saw that they were like moving around a little bit, I thought it'd be kind of cool to make that on purpose to kind of mimic how some owls are able to like change their face. For makeup, I googled like owl makeup to look for inspiration, and everything sucked. I'm so sorry to any makeup artist who's tried. I just don't like how it looks. I think most of it that I've seen looks messy and uncanny, and it's just not the vibe I'm going for. So instead, I opted for something more subtle and stylized. I used the glasses and big yellow contacts to mimic those big owly eyes. I did some feathery eyebrows and did some like very heavy contouring, particularly like on the chin and on the nose, to kind of create like very pointed avian features, but keeping it stylized and not like drawing a literal beak on my face. And so between the glasses, the wig, and the makeup, that was pretty much all I had for the costume to begin with. The other costumey elements I'm remaking today came much later on. Moving on, we're gonna make a second pair of these.
It's actually starting to amuse me how often I will say to the camera, hey, I'm gonna do this thing. And then the second I stop recording, I change my mind. Anyway, I changed my mind about the cups because these are in such good condition, it feels a little bit wasteful to remake them. So quick recap, literally all it is that same trim I have sewn on with a zigzag stitch to some faux fur, and at the back here I've sewn a little bit of elastic so that it can like expand slightly to go over my wrist, and that's it. The rest of it is gluing feathers into this, which I'll probably add some more feathers to it. I am gonna remake some little arm warmers to cover that bit that I was talking about so it goes up into my what's it called? Elbow. I forgot the word elbow. I only have a couple of little offcuts of this jersey fabric left, but there's definitely enough for the cuffs. I'm cutting out 2 little folded rectangle bits. I'm just sort of tracing where the curve of my wrist and above my thumb is, and we're gonna sew along that line with a stretch stitch. And again, since this is a jersey fabric that doesn't really fray, I can leave those edges raw once I've cut them down and just turn the whole thing inside out and we're done. I love it when a fabric allows me to be lazy. Comfy, easy, and breathable arm warmers, and the cuffs fit over perfectly. Speaking of the cuffs, I want to make this way more feathery, so I've just got like a bunch of different feathers of like various colors and lengths and shapes. I have a bit of a quick, dry, strong glue here that I'm going to put on both sides at the bottom of the feather, and I'm going to press that between the fur fibers, trying to get it as close to the base of the fur as possible. And I'm just going to build this up until I'm happy with it. I'm not going super crazy because I still want to be able to use my hands without the feathers getting in the way. But I love how these look with all the extra detail on them.
So I've got pretty much the entire base layer done. Last time I did make myself a little like capelet, sort of cloak type thing, which I'm still pretty happy with, not gonna lie. It's made out of like an upholstery fabric, and I've got this really beautiful little wintry style trim on the bottom. I did make, as you can see, this sort of like fluffy, feathery top to it, and I'm not 100% sure if I love it. I tend to find it's a little bit too much around my neck, especially since my hair, which is also gonna be like white fluffy with feathers, is right there. It kind of makes it all one big loopy thing. I don't know if that makes any sense, and I'm probably overthinking this for a silly little owl character. So I actually have this little capelet, which I actually made for a friend's wedding earlier this year. It's literally just like a semicircular fabric with a little bit of a hole in the top where my head goes, and this is pure wool, and I even lined it with a pure silk satin. This was literally like a scrap of satin. Like, this is literally about the size of the piece of satin it was. So I think I used this relatively well, and because it was only really an offcut, I don't feel too bad that I'm gonna throw this whole thing in the pot of diet.
Don't know what happened with the audio there, but it's going in the coffee bath right after I finished with round 2 for the pants.
Round 2 coffee pants, let's go!
So I ended up putting like a smidge of actual like fabric dye in with the coffee pot this time. This stuff seemed to soak up the dye like a sponge. I was a little bit worried.
Segue number 3. This was the first TikTok that I ever posted of Juniper, and I think something about her resonated with people. Partly because it was 2020, we're all in full lockdown during the unprecedented times, p.m. and into her I channeled a sense of like comfort, gentleness, and silliness. And I think those are the kind of things we all needed more of at that point. And this was a time where like TikTok and Instagram were less rampant with cyberbullying and cringe culture, and there was more of a sense of earnestness existing in these spaces. Anyway, the more little skits I made, the more a personality seemed to develop for Juniper. She was a smart, bookish character, a potion maker, alchemist, friendly but awkward, both a coffee fiend and tea enthusiast. But I'm going to resist the urge to give you guys the 30-page backstory, including her sister, the family, arrival, in-universe origins of harpy kind and subspecies, and the creation myths, and the ties to the Fey world and ancestry. Let's move on before I break out the binder and spreadsheets. Okay, the cosplay gods are smiling on me today because the timing for this was just insane. The second I put my cloak into the coffee pot to soak, this arrived at my door. So this is my order from Lumen's Workshop, which is like my local go-to place for cosplay stuff. And it's just a buttload of EVA foam. This stuff specifically is hard light EVA foam. So as the name implies, it's pretty hard, but it's also very light. So it's perfect for something like feathers. I'm gonna use it to cut out a bunch of feathers for my arm wings. The main reason I'm not using the polycell packing foam, which I've used for the previous really big wings that I've made, mostly comes down to the fact that those ones can be quite delicate, even though they are very, very light. And I do need the ones on my arms to be a little bit stronger and be able to take a little bit of a beating because they're going to be on my arms. I wear this costume all the damn time, which means it's going to be knocked around at conventions, at LARP events, at the imaginary Ren fairs that I wish I could go to. And you saw at the start how banged up my previous pair was because I didn't really have them primed and painted up properly. Also, I get irrationally excited when I get a package from Lumen's Workshop because they always send you a little packet of gummy bears too.
So to get the rough length of my wings, I'm just sort of tracing out one of my old banged up hair. I am going to make mine a tiny bit shorter this time around just because I want them to be a little bit more functional rather than just looking pretty. Like I don't want them to really be getting in the way while I'm wearing them. I'm going to cut out a ton of really long rectangles, a couple of slightly shorter, slightly thinner rectangles, and I'm going to lay all of these out in like the rough wing shape already just so I know that I've got enough for what I need. You need 2 sets of this bottom row, 1 for each wing, and double for all the rows above that so you can cover both sides of the wings. And once I know I have enough, I'm going to start cutting these out into like more of a rounded feather shape. In the past, I've done this with a hobby knife over a cutting mat. It's definitely faster and smoother, but I don't have any hobby knife blades at the moment, so we're just doing with scissors. And I'm going back over them and cutting out these little notches here. This is just going to kind of create some of that feathery texture. Also, these extra pink and white feathers are just plain craft foam because it turns out I didn't buy enough of that hard light EVA foam. Each of these feathers is going to get blasted with a heat gun that is going to seal the foam and create like a better surface for priming and painting. And to create a bit of shape with these ones, I'm just going to like pinch down the center. It's going to kind of mimic the shape of like, what's it called? A feather spine? I feel like spine's the right word. You know, the bit down the center of a feather. I use the hard light foam for all of these longer feathers just because they are going to be the ones that require the most durability and sturdiness. And so all of these craft foam feathers are creating the slightly shorter ones that are going to sit on top of those. Hopefully won't be too much of an issue that they're a bit more delicate. Seeing them layered like this, you can get an idea for how it creates that beautiful shape once they're heat formed. For now, we are heading out into the garage and each of these is getting several layers of white plastidip. Side note, why is the word plastidip so hard to say? I've always really gotten tongue-tied over it. Anyway, letting them dry between each of the layers as I layer up, I had about 3 coats of plastidip in the end, and then I started adding on a coat or 2 of like just plain matte white spray paint. I have found in the past like the ultra matte spray paints are really the best if you're planning on painting over the top of them.
All right, so all of my feathers are done. I have a horrible sense of Groundhog Day or deja vu because I think this is like the 4th set of wings that I've made since March.
So to paint a bit of texture on these wings, I'm just going over and brushing along the sides here, just leaving those streaks in to sort of mimic that fluffy texture of feathers.
All of my feathers are looking absolutely lovely. They've all now dried. You do get a little bit of a pink glow from a certain angle with these ones, partly because of course I've got the pink underside here. So what I'm going to do with these ones is I am going to go back over the underside and paint just along the outside here so that the underside only shows up with that same brown.
Since the foam has some thickness to it, I'm dragging my brush over the edges to make sure none of that white is showing there either.
Okay, good morning, my loves. All my wing feathers are dry. They are ready to be put together. So what I've got to start us off, piece of power mesh. This shape is literally just like, I've just traced a little shape from underneath my arm where the crook of the elbow is there. And this is just a stretchy mesh fabric. So it's nice and soft, nice and light. Has a bit of stretch to it, which means that like hopefully if I'm flexing my arm, it'll stretch with it. And if I attach the feathers in the right way with a couple little breaks in between, I'm hoping that'll mean that I can like flex my arm without the feathers and like the wings all cracking and resisting against it, if that makes sense.
So I'm basically gradually placing my feathers where I want to glue them and then just gradually gluing them in place as I go, just to make sure that they're not moving around too much and I've got the exact shape that I want coming together. There's a slightly larger gap between feathers around the middle of the wing here, where the feathers are attached to the mesh but not to each other. I'm hoping that will help allow for some articulation through the elbow without like destroying the wing. I'm going to cut off the excess feathers at the top here to round out back to the shape of that wing. And yes, I am running the top of this wing through the sewing machine. I know you don't usually sew through EVA foam, but this foam is thin enough and my sewing machine heavy duty enough to get through it. And my hope is it'll help reinforce and hold the feathers in place even if the glue isn't as strong as I would like. Okay, row number 2, let's go. I think I might be pushing my luck slightly trying to fit a second row through the sewing machine, but it worked alright, so I think I'm just gonna leave it at that. We're not gonna try and fit the third row in. Alright, flipping this one over, I'm gonna cut off any of this excess power mesh as much as I can lower down on the feathers so that it's really only attaching them towards the top or where I happen to put glue slightly too far down the feather. For row 2 on the back of the feathers, I gave in and used some contact adhesive. I didn't trust my sewing machine to go through the third row of feathers, and I'm not 100% convinced that the quick dry adhesive is super strong, and most of these feathers are like a little bit bigger and heavier, so I do want them really well secured. Now I have these beautiful textured rooster feathers that I'm going to use right at the top to line my wings. My hope is that integrating some natural feathers will help kind of make the foam feathers a bit more convincing and add some texture and dimension to the whole thing. And I've kept this piece long enough I can wrap it all the way around to the other side of the wings too.
It's definitely still looking a little bit sparse, so I've got all of these spare pieces still. I'm going to start to like insert them between some of these feathers just to fill the whole thing out a little bit more.
Now don't worry, at this point my room has been thoroughly ventilated and I have switched back to the quick dry adhesive. I figured for these really smaller feathers it should be okay because they're sort of being held in between the big ones anyway.
Okay, we've got 2 wings now fully done and ready to rumble. I'm pretty happy with how these ones turned out. Having said that, I think I want to do a tiny little bit more paintwork on some of those foam feathers just to kind of, I don't know, just bump it up a little bit. I think that the texture of them is still a little bit simplistic.
I've watered down and added a tiny bit more yellow to the previous paint I was using, and I'm just going to brush that back over the feathers. And just because it is watered down with a little bit more of a yellow, I get just like a slight variation in color and a way of creating like a tiny bit more gradient on the wings, which is just enough extra dimension from what I was hoping for. But I wasn't quite done, so I actually went back over them and added in these little white speckle dots. I have no idea quite what I was going for here, but I like the end effect anyway.
Good morning, my loves. It is about 3 degrees warmer today, which is not much, but it's enough that I'm taking that opportunity to get out of my blanket hoodies and thermals and pajamas back into some actual clothes. So we're going back to my Gothic Miss Frizzle default fashion choice, I guess. Anyway, my wings are looking wonderful. I'm really happy with the extra texture I've added to them. The only thing that I really haven't done on these is add in some sort of like matte varnish onto the paint here, just to sort of protect and seal it all in, and it'll help sort of durability, I guess. But I think I'm going to leave that for future Charlotte to deal with. For now, I need to figure out how to attach these. And the previous pair that I made, I just kind of had like some cuffs and a bunch of hooks on my shirt. It wasn't the best idea.
So the same way I made the waistband for the pants, I'm just wrapping some of this jersey fabric around a piece of elastic, but I did take the elastic out and turn this inside out and then thread the elastic back through just because this is going to have a lot of those seams showing, so I want to make sure they look a little bit neat. I'm sewing on a couple little squares of Velcro to either end, and that's it for the process for making both the wrist cuffs and the elbow cuffs. I sewed just along the very edge to the top of the wings here, and then again for the other straps around the middle of the wings where my elbow's going to be. I'm making this look quick and easy, but this was actually tedious and just took me ages to get everything right. Using the same process but with this thicker piece of elastic, I'm going to make a piece that's going to sit across my back. No Velcro for this one, but it is getting some loops of the smaller elastic that are going to go around my shoulders.
And the idea is that's just like a nice easy harness. I'm going to be able to just loop around my arms like I would a backpack. And I've kept this really simple and low profile because it doesn't really need to hold much weight. Theoretically, these straps are going to hold it onto my actual arms. So if I sew this little back corner here, somewhere around here. It's just going to be enough to kind of hold it in place while it's moving around on my arm. And then it also means that like if I want to use my arms like a little bit more close up and don't want the wings in the way, I should theoretically be able to take off either that strap or both straps, and it'll still be hanging onto me via that back harness thing. So my hands will be free doing stuff. I can put it back on later, that sort of thing. Okay, so here's basically how they're going to work and how they are looking on. You can kind of see like there's a little bit of articulation where that sort of moves around. It doesn't really interrupt my movement of my arms too much. The first thing I want to fix is I am getting rid of this goddamn Velcro. It's such bad quality. I have no idea where I got it from because it's been sitting in my drawer for however long, but like all of these, it's already coming undone. Like it literally, you can see it coming undone. I can feel that's it. And if that does that like right now, there's no way it's gonna last like an hour or so. So I'm gonna look at my stash, see if I've got like maybe some press studs or something like that instead. Something to secure that a little bit better. Okay, I think we are finally done attaching these damn wings. They move nicely. They're not really restricting the movement of my arms in any way. I'm happy with how I attached them at the back. I'm sorry I didn't film myself attaching any of the press studs for this. I'm gonna be honest, guys, it was just because I'm getting increasingly frustrated with these wings. Like, I'm happy with how they're looking, but attaching all these little cuffs and harnesses, I expected that to take maybe an hour or two, but it's 6 p.m. It's dark outside, and I started these when I woke up this morning. The wings are functionally good enough for now, so I'm gonna leave them as is and then get back to the cloak. Okay, so my little capelet thing has come out really strong on the dye here. Like, this is fully dry. It's been washed. I did forget to mention that both with the pants and with this, after it's been dyed, I've basically given it like a second rinse in like a vinegar solution, because apparently that helps like set the dye so it's color fast. It does mean everything smells faintly of coffee and vinegar now, which is a kind of a weird scent, but I'm sure that'll fade in time. Anyway, really impressed by how it soaked up that color. I wonder if it's because like silk and wool here are both protein fibers, I think. Someone who knows fiber stuff, feel free to actually me in the comments. Anyway, that's opposed to like the plant fibers, so maybe there's like different qualities in how they soak up dye. In any case, a little bit darker than I was hoping for, but I'm okay with that, so I'm just gonna roll with it. What I want to do ideally is shorten it and also shape it so that it's a little bit more of a fitted thing as opposed to just like this sort of triangular shape. So my thoughts are possibly sewing it like along here and then down like this, so it slopes off the shoulders and hugs in a little bit tighter on the top of the arms, and that will also shorten it a fair bit, taking off this length.
So I did exactly that. I did a straight stitch along both of those lines and then just cut off the excess. I left some of the excess attached at the top because I was originally thinking about using it as part of a collar, but I ended up ditching it later on.
That is pretty good for the shape that I was after. It's just like a little bit more structured. That's looking good.
To make a collar, I cut out a long rectangle with like a slight curve in it out of that cheesecloth / muslin, whatever this is, and some of the scrap wool I cut off the capelet. And we're back to doing some classic bag lining, doing a straight stitch to attach these ones, cutting off the excess, turning the whole thing inside out, and we're ready to rumble. I hadn't really accounted for the fact that both of these fabrics are vastly different thicknesses, so it was really hard to get it sitting flat. So I kind of let some of the wool roll over a little bit at the top and form a lip before I sewed it down. It worked to make everything sit flat again, and it kind of formed a cool border, so win-win for me. To finish off these edges, I just created like a pseudo rolled hem with the wool and sewed it down.
Okay, base cloak done. Looking at different ways to embellish it. The one thing I didn't want to do is I didn't want to go for like full-on opulent laciness, like definitely maximalist vibes, but not like fancy laces or a lot of gold work. And I did kind of stumble across something with this, which is literally, it's just like a braid that I've done of that sort of cheesecloth muslin material. I don't know what you call this, but this material here, basically, I didn't super love that frayed edges, so I think I managed to get this because I was cutting on the bias just to see what it would look like. I cut some more on the, is it called the weft or the weave? I don't know, the one that goes like straight across next to the selvage. That's the part I cut it on, and it results in way less fraying, and you can kind of see I've done this like little tiny bit of this twine that I've got in a white and gold in between, just for some extra decoration, and I really like that. I think it's like decorative but still feels like homely and natural, like a kind of thing someone could weave by themselves.
Clamping my straps to the end of the desk, I got to braiding. The only part of this that really required a bit of extra care was making sure that that white thread always shows up and doesn't get like buried in the rest of the fabric. With the end secure, I sewed this straight onto my capelet and this little toggle you'll see in a moment to attach it at the front. And while we're not going for like actual opulence, there's definitely like a crow-like fascination with shiny things and trinkets. So we're sewing a couple of gold pieces to the cloak.
Hello, it is the next day, as you can probably tell by the much better lighting. Yeah, looking at this, I'm declaring this one finished. I'm really happy with how the color turned out. I did mention before that it was darker than I expected, and I'm kind of okay with that because I'm thinking like it's gonna have a darker layer up here. I've got the slightly darker leather belt in my middle, and I've got the darker boots as well. So it all kind of ties it all together, you know? I may end up adding like some embroidery or something in the future, but for now, I think I'm gonna sit with it, wear it to a couple of conventions as Juniper, and see if I do want to add anything to it. Okay, there's only really one thing left to make now, which is kind of our grand finale. We are making the harpy headpiece, which is basically the wig that's got the ears that do this, that's all feathery. You guys know the one. To everyone who skipped ahead to this section, welcome. Glad you could join us. All right, I'm gonna try and keep this section as tutorially as possible by like explaining everything as step by step as I can. Firstly, supplies list, things you will need. Very first thing is get yourself a wig that you're going to be using as your base. I tend to find that like short, spiky, fluffy anime style wigs work really well because it's easy to blend feathers through them. Ideally, I would recommend getting some sort of like mannequin head. It does just make it way easier to have something to stand your headpiece on while you're working on it. You need one of these. It's basically like a fascinator base. I've heard them called like millinery bases as well. This one is a teardrop shape. I don't know what it's made of, but if you look for millinery supply stores, they tend to have things like this fairly often. I'm gonna literally just take the clips off this. My one happens to be cheaply made enough that I can kind of just rip them off if I'm careful. Yeah. Like that, because this part is going to form the part of the wig that sits like towards your forehead here. So we don't need those clampy bits. We're going to sew this onto the front of that wig. You want some sort of thin elastic. I use shirring elastic. I just find it's thin enough to work really well, but strong enough that it's not going to instantly break on you. I've also got some fishing line. This is basically to move the ears with. This stuff here is core flute. It's basically like a plastic cardboard. A little bit of really cheap light fabric. I just like to use the cheapest, lightest poplin that I can get my hands on. You need hardly any of this, so if you've got any like scraps of fabric lying around, that'll probably do the job. Some needles and thread. You do want at least one needle that has like an eye that's going to be big enough that you can fit through the shirring elastic and your fishing line. And then to decorate the whole thing, you just want an absolute buttload of feathers and some glue. For the glue, I recommend something that gets tacky almost straight away so that you can glue and just keep going, because you might be gluing on feathers for a couple of days.
To help me keep things symmetrical, I'm drawing a line right down the center of my fascinator base and straight across in the other direction. The exact shape of the headpiece just changes based on my design, but for Juniper, I don't really need a lot of this, so I'm cutting it down to a much smaller little diamond shape. This wig comes with like a lot of hair and bulk towards the front of the wig. I'm cutting off some of that excess hair, so I've got a fair bit of space that I can sew that little fascinator base to. This is where those lines first come in handy. I'm basically sewing from that like center point here and sewing it along the front of the wig. You can see I've actually drawn another line to create like a little bit of a curve. This is going to help that fascinator base stay curved so it sits like more flush with your forehead. You can see the curved line I've sewn it on a little bit clearer underneath here. Back on the top of the wig, I'm reinforcing this by putting a little tiny bit of glue between the fascinator base and the wig and then pressing it down. I'm also going to tie on a bunch of extra stitches around here to make sure it's sitting as flush as possible. Moving on to the ears, I'm going to cut out a couple of pieces of the core flute here. Like with all my crafting projects, I very rarely measure, it's just vibes. I just use the ruler mostly just to make sure I'm drawing straight lines. You can see even this bottom edge, I am slanting slightly. That's going to make sure these ears sit upright and not going side to side on your head. Next, we're going to make a sort of sleeve for these things. So I'm basically going to wrap it in some of this poplin and sew along the line from the tip of the ear towards the base. Give yourself a little bit of space between the stitch line and where the core flute's sitting, because we're going to take that out in a moment. And I guess this step is probably optional, but I'm going to turn this this inside out to hide those seams. Breaking out my trusty quick dry adhesive yet again, we're going to put that right back in this sleeve. Once you've pressed this down, make sure that you leave a little bit of excess poplin at the bottom here. That's going to form like a bit of a hinge for us later. Back to the wig, I'm drawing a line roughly where I want to sew on my ear to use as a guide. Much like the size of the ears or the shape of the forehead, the exact place that you sew in the ears will change the look of the headpiece, so I tend to vary it depending on the design. Sew it in by some of that spare poplin at the bottom, leaving just enough so that you can flap the ear back and forth once it's attached. Now I can cut off any excess, but I do leave a little bit behind to make sure I can stick some glue under there and press down, which will help reinforce the stitches and sort of make sure that this doesn't fray.
All right, so we've got ears, we've got a little forehead bit going on. These are flipping around nicely. That's what we want. Now that fishing line has been threaded through a relatively thick needle here. It's a nice sharp point on this one because it's about to go through the core flute and the 2 layers of poplin here. So it needs to be strong enough to get through there. I'm going to stab it through roughly around like a third from the bottom here. Again, no measurements, just vibes. You're probably going to find that really hard to push through without like a thimble on your finger. I'm going to cheat and use the table here and just push that down like that. I'm going to go back through the other side. So I've literally just tied that on. I'm going to cut off the excess here, but I'm still going to leave a little bit here so it doesn't unravel. And then later on when I'm covering this with feathers, that's going to get glued down flush with the actual ear itself. So that's not going anywhere. So now with this extra bit of string here, I'm going to rethread that through my needle. And that needle is going to go through somewhere just to the side of the forehead crest here. And what I'm looking for is to try and get it through one of the holes that is in the lacing around here. And I like to aim for trying to get into this corner here, but still making sure that you're poking through an area where there's a relatively decent hole already, just so that that string can easily pull back and forth through this section here. So now we've got this bit of string here, which is threaded from here down through here, so that if you pulled on it underneath, that still moves that ear nicely and doesn't really get in the way. But where that string is going to sit on your face right now is still relatively in the middle of your face. It's going to drive you crazy. So I like to do one more little stitch, which is threading it through one of these stitches here on the side of the face here. I'm going to thread it just below those 2 stitches there. So same thing, but now the string is coming out around here, so it's closer to the side of the face, and you're still going to be able to pull that for it to go up and down.
Okay, get some shirring elastic on your needle, and I'm just going to use the same holes, but going from the back to the front and then to the back again. Once again, tying off the excess to secure it in place. With the rest of the elastic, I'm threading this one just like a couple of inches behind the ear through the wig lace. Now the tricky part with the elastic is finding the right tension. You want just enough elastic at the top here that it's going to take some of that tension so that when the headpiece flips up, the elastic helps pull the ear back down, as you can see. I'm going to tie mine a tiny weeny bit tighter than that, and this is why I don't do further stitches at the bottom until I find exactly the right tension that I'm happy with for the top. You only want the elastic just tight enough to pull that ear back. Once I've found exactly the right point, I'm going to tie this off so that that elastic is exactly as much as I need and no more. I like to try and keep the bottom of the headpiece free from any of the loose ends, so I'm going to thread this back through the headpiece so that if there's any loose ends still on this elastic, it's sort of nestled in between the hair and not rubbing against my scalp or the wig cap.
All right, as silly as this looks right now, I just want to do a quick test run before I move on. Both my strings are sitting either side of my face. Everything's sitting comfortably. Everything looks relatively even. And then if I pull on these strings, that is looking wonderful. So a couple of quick little things I'm going to do. For one, when I sewed these on, I've also like accidentally sewn in a bunch of this hair here. That is super easy to fix. You can kind of just like slowly start to pull those hair fibers out of that stitching. Usually I would start to do this bit straight after I sew this down and before I put the glue there, but do as I say, not as I do. So settle in, because I'm going to be gluing feathers onto this for the next 2 days. Well, for you guys with the magic of editing, it'll just be a few minutes, but let's get into it. Juniper isn't based on any particular owl species. I just want her to feel owly, so I'm really fond of using these ones, and these are feathers from a Reeves pheasant. Anyway, I've got some larger, longer ones like this and some little tiny ones like this. I also have these fluffy little plumage feathers. These are going to be great for giving that fluffy texture.
With the larger feathers I'm going to put at the tip of the ears, I've cut off the base here and just going to start gradually building this one up, gluing them down as I go. And I mean, that's basically the process for the entire rest of the headpiece. I'm also using some wing feathers from my chickens from their last molt. These have been, of course, thoroughly cleaned and sterilized, but I'd still never use feathers from my girls on anyone else's headpiece. For the back of the ears, I try and use really large, wider, flat feathers, and preferably my less expensive ones, just because you don't really see them, they're just to kind of disguise the poplin. And a few smaller fluffy feathers right here at the base to cover up where it joins the wig. Back to the front, I'm keeping the remaining rows using these little fluffy feathers just because I love that texture. If you're making your own, don't be afraid to layer in as many as you like until you're happy with how it looks. We're gonna do exactly the same thing with that forehead section now, moving from the larger feathers back down to the smaller fluffy ones towards the point of the forehead. To help blend in between the ears and the forehead section, I got just a small bit of glue on the ends of these feathers and I'm pushing it into the wig hair. The closer towards the wig cap you can glue the feather, generally speaking, the more secure it'll be. And you can probably see why these shorter, spiky anime wigs work so well with feathers. As the finishing touches, I'm going to use some of those longer, floppy rooster feathers, and that's going to kind of help blend between those feathered sections at the front and where I want to leave the wig blank at the back. Okay, last awkward little segue here, but I wanted to take a second to acknowledge all the incredible support I've received for this character over the years. The incredible fan art, all the stories you send me of using Juniper as a D&D shopkeeper or NPC, parents who tell me how much your kids love seeing the Juniper videos. I don't have enough words to express how deeply happy it makes me. So thank you to everyone who's been part of that, no matter how big or how small. So I think we're done. I've done some very light teasing just to some of the wig that doesn't have the feathers in it, just to give it that like spiky disheveled look. And looking at it next to the old wig over here, like I think I did a pretty good job of replicating my own work, honestly. Just to show you on this one as well, it doesn't look too bad from afar. Up close, you can see some of the feathers here are getting quite disheveled. Like this is coming completely undone. These are still cardboard from like 4 years ago. So this is not really waterproof. Even the wig has got like entire patches that I had to cut out because I got something stuck in there that couldn't come out, and I've replaced it with like a bit of faux fur to try and hide it at the back. And you can see some of the feathers have gotten completely bent out of shape or just not quite fixable, like missing large chunks now. That being said, I'm worried I'm going to put this on and like it's not going to feel like the OG, you know? I'm worried that I've just replaced too many things all at once and it's not going to quite feel right. I know that might sound like ultra sensitive for like a bunch of clothes for a cosplay, but I'm not even sorry. I'm very attached to this character for obvious reasons. Well, this was the last step, so let's do this. All right, contact lenses are in. I put some primer on and now I'm just putting on some foundation that's a little bit lighter than my skin tone, which is saying a lot, mind you. I haven't put any foundation on this like forehead section here because that is where the little point is gonna sit. And also with my little eyebrows here, I haven't really mentioned them or talk about them. I'm just gonna gloss over them very briefly right now. I painted a line of liquid latex down onto some baking paper, and while it was still wet, used it basically like glue to layer up a bunch of tiny feather pieces. Once the liquid latex dries, you can basically peel the whole thing off the baking paper and it becomes its own little prosthetic. And you can see in the new pair on the bottom, I've gone for more of an art shape than I have before.
So the latex is fully dried. I've applied some spirit gum to the back here. I'm just gonna wait a moment and let that get a little bit tacky before I stick it over my eyebrows. Now, I don't recommend doing this for pretty much most people, and I talked about the reasons why in my Husk video, so go watch that if you want some more details. I'll link that somewhere. But long story short, I don't want to be responsible for anyone pulling out their eyebrow hairs. I pull mine out all the time doing this, and that is okay with me.
I'm gonna draw this little triangle shape on my nose with like a brown eyebrow pen, and with a sort of brown contour, I'm gonna blend from there underneath my eyebrows and away from my nose, keeping that inner line nice and crisp. We're gonna get real heavy-handed with the contouring just under the top of the cheekbones and under the chin. I went for white pencil on my waterline rather than black as I usually would, hoping it'll make my eyes look a bit more rounded and owly. I'm not sure how I feel about it just yet. Some liquid black eyeliner on the top. I'm using a brown contour to color in my lips, and then a pinky gold highlighter dabbed over the top. Some lashes and gemstones as final touches, and I'm ready to rumble.
So here we are, and what can I say? I mean, I'm a little bit emotional about how well everything turned out. And of course, the ears do work very nicely. They're like a slightly different angle from the original headpiece. I'm totally fine with that. They still have exactly the same kind of feel to them. Definitely not going to get emotional about an imaginary bird lady, but I'm very, very happy, guys. This is about as far back in the room as I can go. This room is not big enough to show you the full length, but it looks pretty amazing. Oh, yep, see what I mean? This room is not big enough for this sort of thing, but Here's my shoes as well, just so you can see I am wearing the full outfit. Minus the cloak and wings because this is the base outfit. I'm gonna put those on in a second.
As with all my projects, I never fully consider it done. I think there's still little tweaks and changes that I'm going to make to Juniper's outfit. But after so long of it sitting around in disrepair, I'm just really glad to see her back. And I'm pretty chuffed with all the little quality of life changes that I made.
Juniper as a character represents curiosity, comfort, patience, and the sheer joy of being your own little weird self and a force of positivity in a world full of bigots and bullies and, look, things far darker than the scope of this cosplay video. Juniper is my love letter to fantasy and wonder. If you have questions for me or if you have some ideas for skits, I'm particularly fond of anything involving potion puns or mimic shenanigans. Please do comment them below. I do try and read the majority of my comments. Also, I've got merch now. Some of it even has Juniper's face on it, featuring this fantastic artwork from the creator Laurent Reese and some beautiful illustrations from Rhaenyra's art. I will put the link to all of that in the description below. A huge thank you to my ultimate supporters. These are my top dogs on Patreon: Artemis, Dakota, Fluky, Residual Images, Rakishan, Robert Mischief, Tamara, Tim, and Yuri. Thank you guys so much. And a big thank you to these other incredible Patreon supporters who are on screen now. Wow, look at the names of all these very handsome and or beautiful, intelligent, funny, and very cool people. If you want to be as cool as these guys, come and join us over on Patreon. I post work in progress, behind the scenes, and entirely exclusive content you cannot find elsewhere. And joining there is the best way to support me so I can keep making the most ridiculous and ambitious projects. But just by watching, liking, subscribing, sharing, all those things that keep those YouTube robots happy, you are helping and supporting me. So thank you very, very much. And I can't wait to see you guys again next time. Bye!